and we will be recording the session as well. Just wanted to make everyone aware that in today's session, there are no wallies. So you remember from last webinar, there was the little wombat warning sign that you were dedicated and counting as part of the presentation, but no wally in today's module. The reason being we don't have a quiz following to today's session, we have an assignment, okay? So in case you're looking, there won't be any today. So just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that one. Few things I wanted to just touch on because there was lots of questions that came through in last modules session. So I just wanted to go through just some interesting sites that we've come across. This is another example of, using line marking and things like that to delineate the hazard. As you can see here, the hazard being the signposts. But having this really narrow section here is really not a terrific outcome. It would have been better to have sign kind of acting over here or something like that. This same path also looks a little bit like this further down the track. And I think it's a good rule of thumb where if your stencil for your pedestrian and bicycle doesn't actually fit on the path, it's probably not a good shared path. So that's a good rule of thumb there. The other thing that we actually mentioned at the end of last session was this idea of using transverse kind of rumble strips on bike paths to make cyclists aware that there is some kind of, hazard or something that they need to be aware of coming up. This is an example of one that's actually installed in Melbourne. It's a little bit difficult to see, but you can see there's these little bluestone bars. And as you're cycling across them, they actually do provide a bit of a haptic feeling. So you feel it in your handlebars, you feel it in your hands, and it's just to acknowledge that at this point here, there's a pedestrian priority point. So that's where it's designated as a zebra crossing. And that is, just to make cyclists aware that they need to slow down in this area and they can't just bolt on through. So that's another way that you can manage that risk with pedestrians. Now, hopefully everyone managed to watch the 360-degree video footage from our previous module. Within that example, we actually provided two different scenarios where cyclists were crossing the road. So we've got example 1 here on the left and example 2. And Marissa, if you don't mind, would you mind just launching a poll? I'd just like to hear some feedback from participants about which example do you think shows best practice design for a shared path crossing a road? Give you a moment just to fill that one out. And I'd also be interested if anyone in the chat wanted to put down their experience about the 360-degree footage, if you were able to move around the screen and if you had any issues accessing that. I'd just appreciate any feedback that you had from that experience. That'd be great.
This question that's come in while people answer the poll there. Any issues you're aware of with the slippery surface of the bluestone rumble strips?
Yeah, it comes up every now and then because it's such narrow little slithers of bluestones, like they're 100 mil kind of wide kind of thing. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a significant issue. But in saying that, if you are able to treat the surface with some kind of friction adhesive or something like that, just to give it a coarser feel, that would probably mitigate that as a risk. But I wouldn't see it as a significant risk there, Ken. Do you have an opinion on it?
Yeah, I agree with you. Just keep it, perpendicular to the travel path and you're good. A couple of people, I think, still can't see the poll, the firewalls.
We had that issue last module. So for those that aren't able to see the poll, the question is, and you can just pop it in the chat, is whether you would say example 1 on the left there is best practice for cyclists crossing over a road, or example 2. So I'll be sure to communicate any of the polls, so you can just pop your answer in the chat. But as mentioned, like, these aren't going towards your overall assessment, so don't be too stressed if you aren't able to access that.
I think we can end that now. I think we've got lots of pretty comprehensively said there, example 1 from our participants. So we'll get rid of that.
Good to see. Yeah, example 1, you've got that raised crossing point. So what we're actually doing is we're physically slowing down motorists as they cross there, and also we're awarding priority to our vulnerable road users. So cyclists don't have to just, slow down and give way to vehicles, as is seen in example 2, where it's just the path ends. You get this connected, continuous journey. So it's a lot more comfortable for cyclists and also a lot safer for cyclists too.
We've had a comment just before you kick off into some other content around something from last session, which was the offset of shared paths from general traffic lanes, and Penelope's pointed out some of the spots in the Austroads guide and some of the Transport for New South Wales walking space guide. But questions really around, do you know of any more clarity in that guidance that's coming in the future? Are you aware of anything in that space?
I would just, say that it's constantly evolving, particularly international guidance. We're continually having to refer to, stuff out of the US, out of Europe and things like that, because they've just evolved their cycling guidance much quicker than what we have here within Australia. Do I expect something to be updated soon? Absolutely. I couldn't give you a time frame as to when things like that will be happening. I know there is an Austroads report developing at the moment regards to cycling and micromobility, but whether that will actually have technical guidance within it, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. And one more, we were just finishing off that rumble strip discussion. Anywhere that we have guidance on rumble strip spacing and placement and things on cycleways? I know there is for roads.
Yeah. That's probably what I would have referred to as well, like roads, particularly approaching rail crossings. That's really where I've seen it, and perhaps that's just been translated onto shared paths. Because as I mentioned Tuesday, like a lot of those traffic engineering principles that kind of work on the road network generally can be scaled down and have a similar presence within shared paths and things like that. So probably that's where I'd first turn to.
Okay. Let's keep going. I'll be behind the scenes monitoring the chat and the Q&A, so keep them coming in, and I'll pause Max along the journey.
Thank you very much. Please keep the questions coming. All right, today's agenda, we will be talking about on-road bicycle lanes. So prior we had all shared paths, everything situated off the carriageway, which, would definitely be considered the gold standard. If we can do that, that's absolutely fantastic. We acknowledge that we do work within constrained environments and we are unable to achieve that at all locations. So what we also need to consider is, well, what can we do to improve safety where cyclists do need to be on the carriageway? And what we generally consider best practice within this realm is the idea of a protected bicycle lane. And if you've never heard that term, that's completely fine. We'll go through a definition of exactly what that means. We'll go through how that can be configured, either in a single direction or bi-directional facility, and we'll talk about different separators that can be used. We'll also have a chat about where you're unable to achieve those kind of physical separations and what other line marking type of treatments that may be applicable. Also discuss the risk of dooring. And finally, we'll get into some content around where it actually may be appropriate to mix traffic. So cyclists would just be able to ride in the middle of a traffic lane, just be treated like any other vehicle. What are the type of situations where something like that may be appropriate? All right, a protected bicycle lane. Here's a wonderful example of one where, for those who are familiar with, what a general kind of carriageway cross section may look like, typically adjacent our curb here is where we would have parked vehicles. And then adjacent the parked vehicles, we may have a bicycle lane. The issue with having the bicycle lane in that scenario or that situation there is obviously it's within the dooring zone, which we'll talk about more, but it's right there in the dooring zone. And it's also adjacent a live traffic lane. So it's quite a precarious situation to be in. A protected bicycle lane flips this cross section. So it brings out the parked vehicles away from the curb and channel. So parked vehicles go over there. It provides separation. We'll talk more about what that separation can look like. And then it pushes cyclists into a protected facility adjacent the curb and channel. So completely removes the risk of dooring, depending on the width of that separation, but generally removes the risk of dooring, and also gets cyclists away from live traffic. So it's much more comfortable for cyclists to ride in this type of facility. The other reason I include this particular photo as a best practice scenario is just the width of this facility is something that I think is really important. Because as you can see, we've got two cyclists there comfortably riding two abreast. And this is a commuter route, this particular example. And, you know, it's not uncommon to have people that just really want to get places, get to work or whatever it is, going at rather high speeds. And also people that are happy just to dawdle along, or children on bicycles using this type of facility as well, traveling much slower. And providing that width to enable cyclists to overtake is a really, really good idea, because if you've got a narrower facility, you could just have that frustration of being stuck behind someone very slow, which could then lead them to not using that facility and just riding on the road anyway. So I think it's a really good practice to be able to provide that width, you know, where there is a space to be able to do so. Before we get into all the wonderful design details about a protected bicycle lane, well, very reasonable question is, why would we bother doing these things? And City of Melbourne a few years ago conducted a survey to the general population, not just to cyclists, but they asked the question about what type of facilities do you feel confident riding in? 83% said, yeah, I'm confident riding in a protected bicycle lane. That's really fantastic. Only 22% felt confident riding on an on-road bicycle lane adjacent that dooring zone. So when we're talking about our strategic cycling corridors or the networks that we have, you know, nominated and prioritized for cycling infrastructure, if we're not delivering infrastructure that meets the needs of that community, we're just not going to see that uptake, or we're not going to see that interest in riding in those environments. As I mentioned in the previous module as well, when we are designing these type of networks, we should be considering cyclists aged from age 8 to 80. Think about, you know, have you got any children yourself around that 8 or 10-year-old mark, or nieces or nephews or whatever it is? You know, would you feel comfortable with them riding in a painted lane like that? Odds are probably not. So it demonstrates that the community really do value the safety that protected bicycle lanes offer there. So there's a couple configurations that you can potentially investigate as part of protected bicycle lanes. This is an example of what's referred to as a one-way path. And as you can see in the cross section, there's a protected bicycle lane that permits travel in one direction on one side of the carriageway, and then mirrored on the other side of the carriageway is another protected bicycle lane. So there's basically one on each side, okay? Perfectly symmetrical. Now, this is I would say more common, or the most common arrangements. There are jurisdictions, like in Sydney in particular, they tend to go for the bi-directional instead, but this is the more common arrangement where you've just got a protected bicycle lane on both sides. Here is just lost my mouse. here's an example of what this could potentially look like, just one in real life. And for those that may have seen this treatment, you may have also heard it referred to as a Copenhagen treatment. It's just this another way to be referred to as, but protected bicycle lane is just another terminology. And I'll give a question out to the group, so get ready to type in your answers in the chat. You may have noticed in this particular picture that there's this kind of separator here, and then there's a gap, and then there's another separator. My question is, what is the gap for? Why would we have that break in the separator?
Lots of people say drainage. Drainage.
Drainage is correct. I'll let you award a prize there, whoever you think got in first. We've got some speedy typists.
Yeah, we do. Steve, Brendan, and Murray can all have prizes for that. Marissa's taking note of that. And we just got some clarity from somebody in there around Sydney trying to move away from the bi-directional lanes and trying to get more of the single lane stuff. But I think you'll talk a little bit more about that.
We do, yeah. We discussed the risks associated with that. But yeah, no, that's interesting. Okay. I've certainly seen a lot around Sydney, but interesting that they're going for something else. I will just, for those that aren't familiar with why drainage was picked there, if this was just a constant curb there, then when you have large rainfall events, you'd have water obviously pooling all in this area here. And what that means is if you were developing a project, you may actually have to install new curb and channel and new pits and stuff like that to account for all that water, which is very expensive. Whereas if you just put in these little gaps, then it can just maintain your existing drainage lines and you don't need to worry about all that. So it's kind of a really common way to do things, not just have a consistently long barrier. You just use the existing water networks already there. So well done for those that have already picked up on that. So this was the other facility that was mentioned, or the other configuration for protected bicycle lane, where you've actually got cyclists kind of pushed to one side of the carriageway. So bi-directional travel is permitted just on one side of the carriageway. There's a few considerations and benefits associated with this type of treatment, which we will talk about in more detail. And the most important thing is, like, if you were considering this as an option, having a think about what is the adjacent land use on either side of that facility. If cyclists, all the attractions and things like that were situated on this side of the carriageway, there's no real desire to cross over, then this is probably a very attractive option to be investigating. However, the more crossovers that you do have, or if you've got that land use, like a strip shopping centre, for instance, where cyclists will want to be crossing over, then this type of facility may not be as appropriate. Another question for the group. Here is another example of a protected bicycle lane. This one is a bi-directional facility. The question for the group is, in the previous examples that we've shown, we've had this wide separation. Okay, it was like a meter or something shown to account for, just to provide greater separation. Any idea why this one may be narrower? This one's about 300 mil. Give you a couple seconds to think about that one.
We do have lots coming in. There's a few other questions around debris and stuff that might accumulate in the bike lane because of those, and also people asking for crash history around gaps in the curb separators. Any comments on that while I review all these lots of ideas on your question?
I might need a bit more information about the crash history regarding the curb separators. Is that cyclists riding into those, or?
Yeah, I believe just striking
Okay.
the gaps and being sort of snagged or tripped up. I'm not aware of any research or anything around that.
No, I can't say I've seen that either. Yeah. Every now and then they are raised as issues for people with vision impairments. They're a tripping hazard, which is true. They are a tripping hazard. But yeah, there's some options to help delineate that and just make it as obvious as possible. It's certainly not the only curb that's within that carriageway though. So
Okay, we had lots of people saying there's no parking on that side. So I think our winners for this one will be Sam and Hamid. So prizes coming their way.
awesome. Yes. So this is a through traffic lane. This is not actually a parking lane. So you don't have that risk of doors opening, one would hope, which means you do not have the need to or the desire, I suppose, to have such a great level of separation. In a perfect world, of course, the greater separation you can provide, it feels safer for cyclists. And, if there was an errant motorist, that would provide additional safety there. But because the actual dooring risk isn't there, the need for that greater level of separation isn't there either.
And some people have made sort of comments around why that might be the case, limited carriageway space,
Yeah.
balancing stuff out, which is all valid, but we've given our prizes out there. So you keep going, Max.
No, that's a fair point as well. Now, we did have this table here that we produced just to give you some considerations to think about if you are investigating protected bicycle lanes, whether to do a single lane or bi-directional. To be honest, it's quite wordy for my style of presentation, so I'll just hop straight into some like graphics to show you what this is kind of talking about. So, got an example here of a bi-directional path and a one-way traffic stream here. And this vehicle here is exiting. It could be a property access or it could be a minor street or anything like that. So they're exiting that minor leg. Okay? Intuitively, what the driver will be doing is focusing their attention on all of that oncoming traffic, trying to pick a gap. Okay, that's what we're kind of trained to do. That's what we're most cautious of. The big hunks of metal on the road, traveling at 50, 60 kilometers per hour, and we're looking for a gap in there. So we're focused on that direction. It's possible and, somewhat likely that that motorist would also be looking for cyclists that may be traveling towards them, going in that direction. It's unlikely, or it's less likely, that the motorist exiting will be thinking about cyclists traveling in the opposite direction, just because we're not really used to that configuration. It's not something that's part of everyday life that we see every day. I'm certain if this was a very common treatment that is all over a particular CBD or all over a particular network, drivers would be more understanding to look both directions, but generally it's not that common. So you do have that little bit of a risk there. Trying to be able to delineate the space for cyclists traveling in both directions. And in this instance, it's kind of just using a bit of paint there to show that there's, a conflict with cyclists. There's also other examples where it's like cyclists are traveling both directions and they've got arrows to show that, or it says look left, look right kind of thing. But yeah, something to certainly be consider if you are looking at this type of treatment.
Max, a specific questions come in around the curb and any sort of offset buffers that should be provided between curb for pedal strikes and things, as we sort of talked a little bit about last session about trying to keep objects away from that. Any comments on that?
Yeah, so you may have remembered in the last session where we had like a little planter box kind of thing, and it mentioned the heights where that pedal risk becomes an issue. I hope my memory is correct, but I think it's 200 mil or above where that can be considered a risk for that pedal strike. Generally, those curves that we were looking at are below that height, so probably not a significant risk. But as I said in the previous module, if you are looking at planters and using that as a separator, that's that's where that strike can be an issue.
Yeah, and also like we measure to lip of curb usually, so you've got that little extra buffer before the actual barrier point of the curb, if it's a sort of standard curb and channel.
Yep, good. The other consideration that you need to have a think through if you're looking at bidirectional parks is similar idea. If you've got a right-turning vehicle accessing a minor leg and they have to cross over the bidirectional facility, once again, the driver is focused on oncoming traffic. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for a gap in that. And may be able to spot a cyclist that's traveling kind of into the screen there, but that circled yellow cyclist is very difficult to be able to see. So, you know, one of the fundamental principles is ensuring that you've got sight lines and you've got adequate ability to be able to look at each other and slow down and stop if required. And it's kind of difficult to achieve that in all instances with this type of arrangement. In this particular example, you may have noticed that, I'll just get rid of all these scribbles. You may have noticed that there is a little break before entering the bidirectional facility space. So that means theoretically a vehicle could kind of just focus on getting through the gap in traffic and then pause and wait and then cross over the bidirectional facility. So that's a pretty good outcome. But as you can appreciate, that does take up quite a bit of carriageway to be able to account for all of that space. Any questions for those ones there, Ken?
I mean, I think some people are sort of interested in two-way, one-way sort of crossing of roads and the best outcomes and how we can really do crossings with the highest alignment with safe system principles. I think you've sort of covered it associated with those looking both ways. Slowing vehicles at these turning points is a really critical one, as you were just saying there, and really utilising that little bit of buffer with some raised treatments or bluestones or something like that is going to be sort of as good as you get there.
Absolutely. All right, we'll have a chat through some separators because often there's this preconceived notion that this is what a protected bicycle lane is, and if you can't do this, then you can't build a protected bicycle lane. And completely agree that this type of treatment is wonderful, the kind of Copenhagen bicycle lanes where you've got, you know, some type of curbing and maybe a concrete infill or an asphalt infill or something like that that provides the full width of an open door. But the separators don't always have to look like that. You can look at other lower cost options. You know, that could be used on a trial basis and perhaps a bolt down so they can be readily installed and then uninstalled if that was required. But one of the things I wanted to mention about these type of separators, wherever you are putting a bicycle facility adjacent curbs, it's important to think about our curb profile. So I believe this was also mentioned in our previous module. The general rule of thumb, and apologies for those that are not fully conversant with different barrier profiles, what I'm going to be referring to is just the curb that has this type of profile, which is just like a straight vertical face. I'd call that a barrier profile. And the other type that I'll refer to is just like one with more of a slope, which is called a semi-mountable barrier curve. Oh, sorry, semi-mountable curve profile. Generally, the kind of consensus is it's a better outcome for cyclists if we are able to install a semi-mountable profile on the bicycle lane side of things, because if a cyclist were to become errant, that's much more forgiving. Hopefully they'll be able to stay on their bike and not fall off it. Whereas on the parking lane side of things, we want to be installing a barrier curb because we don't want them to be accessing it, the separator or the bicycle facility. We want to make that clear, distinct separation between those two spaces. So what's shown on the left image there is where you've got barrier and barrier, which is not the outcome that we're really looking for. The middle picture is we've got a semi-mountable and semi-mountable, which is not really the outcome either. Instead, the right-hand image is semi-mountable on the bicycle lane side and a barrier curb on the parking lane side. And just to put this one into practice, here is an actual example of where semi-mountable curbing has been used on both sides of the separator. So as I mentioned, that is great for the cyclists, but when you offer that semi-mountable opportunity for motorists, they will just use that to use that as parking, additional parking width. Here's just another example along that segment there of a vehicle that's, actually using the separator to park on. And it really diminishes the safety benefit of your separator because now this door could open up and swing into the bicycle lane. So yes, it's still, improving things, but just having that design feature of a barrier curb on that side would have helped mitigate that as a risk. This last example is one that probably a barrier curb is not going to fix. This is a deliberate intent to park in the bicycle lane, which unfortunately does happen, and some people just will do that regardless of what type of infrastructure you put out there, Ken. This is just to show you what that curb profile looks just on both sides without all the parked cars there. So hopefully that's clear, all the different profiles there. Also wanted to just mention EDA requirements once again. So if you are installing any of your protected bicycle lanes adjacent disabled car parks, you need to have a think about how are those people going to access the adjacent footpath, because as you can imagine, if you're just putting solid separators all the way through there, that would certainly limit their access. So this is just an example of what could be done, providing a clear crossover points with a curb ramp there to ensure that those users can safely access the adjacent footpath. You can do some type of colouring on the bicycle facility there as well, just to highlight that conflict point. It's possible to make that raised, create just a little wombat crossing for cyclists to actually cycle over there. But just something to be mindful of. It's not just kind of being able to put these separators along entire lengths if you've got disabled car parking bays. Here's a little example of what I was mentioning. It's not a wombat crossing. This is a zebra crossing across the bicycle lane. And I might just zoom in here so you can have a little bit of a better look there. I think it's got good intent with, trying to make cyclists aware that pedestrians are crossing at this location. But unfortunately, the execution is not perfect because there's no curb ramps there. So what that means as a pedestrian is you have to kind of walk down onto the carriageway or the bicycle lane and then back up onto the footpath level or where that bus stop is. And for those with any physical impediments, that would be very difficult, or with a mobility scooter or anything like that. So got the right idea there, but the execution wasn't perfect there. And I actually just happened to notice there as well, those little yellow lines, that's another example of those transverse rumble strips where it's just making cyclists aware that they're coming up to a conflict point. So that's just another example of that type of treatment in action. All right, some additional separators. So this was more like, what we saw before, where you don't have that dooring risk. You can provide a narrower separation. This is a bolt down configuration, meaning you can use it temporarily. You can use it as a trial. You can say, we're just going to give this a go for 6 months and see what the community feels like. You might have a lot of interest early in on the project, perhaps negative, but once it's installed, people get used to it, life goes on, and perhaps people even start using it as a cyclist and they think, oh yeah, this is pretty good. So I think it's a really good way to be able to instigate projects just if you are just using them as a trial, and you don't have to invest in big sums of money to do full civil works. You're just bolting into the carriageway, and if it doesn't work out, you can just take it out. This is an example of the separator with the planters, as I mentioned before, which isn't my favorite kind of use of separators. And I'm a real greenie, so I certainly love to see all the vegetation being used there. But the issue that I find is it may look very pretty on day one when all of this gets nice and lovely, manicured and landscapes and everything like that. But 6 months down the track, it's usually filled with rubbish, or it's overgrown, or it's unkept, and you could have debris spilling onto the bicycle path there and things like that. So it's certainly a good idea if you want to get community involvement. Perhaps it could be a community project to help look after those planter beds and also appreciate safer cycling connections and things like that. But just on experience, I find those things tend to get forgotten or not maintained. Another separator type. I told you I've got lots of separators. Any idea where this photo was taken? We'll give a prize out to the first person that can guess that. But this one is another example of those planter boxes with this really kind of small little speed hump that you use in shopping centers kind of thing, used in between those. Just an example here of, what can happen with those planter boxes. This is an example of the soil getting struck and, falling onto the carriageway, but it's not uncommon to see that going the other way, or the planter boxes tipping over completely and blocking the bicycle path. Did we get any guesses there for the city that this one's in?
Colin was quickly onto with Auckland, so we'll...
That is correct. Federal Street in Auckland. Let's give a prize out there.
Yeah, we do have a question in the chat, which is sort of covering along and working your way through this. It's around other lower cost alternatives to protected lanes, 3-metre shared paths and separated facilities and the like, with some councils struggling to justify that expense, especially in outer areas where there are lower volumes of cyclists but higher speed and higher parking volume requirements. Part of me wants to say, well, in order to start to change that, we need to provide those separated facilities so there's not so much demand on cars. But I understand it is that sort of immediate, what to do. But I think you're sort of covering a few other ideas as you tick through these, aren't you?
Yeah, that's the idea. Like, we appreciate that you can't always, get that gold standard with, beautiful bluestone curving everywhere and everything landscaped and looking nice. There's just not always the investment for that. So these are other much cheaper alternatives. And I've got a few more examples of, what can be used to hopefully get these projects developed and delivered.
And there's a number of different sort of local guidance documents around this less permanent infrastructure type treatment, or the trialing, or the pop-up style stuff. We just had a question about, where do they find this guidance? Not sure if we can grab a few and pop them into the LMS, some of the local ones.
There might already be some uploaded in there. I can't remember what we've included in that resource library, but there are specific jurisdictions. You may have your own state guidelines which has some information on this, but I do know that TMR has a wonderful resource. So even if you're not from Queensland, it's probably just worth having a quick Google of TMR. What are they called? Just like low-cost bicycle treatments or trial treatments or things like that. But if you're having any issues finding it, just send me an email and I'll dig it out for you. Okay, another type of separator here. Another question for the chat is, any idea what this separator is called? And the hint is it is named after an animal that it looks like. I like this product because it's 100% recycled plastic. So it's very good for those that are doing projects and you want to kind of focus on that sustainability. This could be a really attractive product for you. My dislike with this product is it's not incredibly visible for general traffic and also for cyclists. So you could potentially ride over one of these things. It's not uncommon to see drivers actually drive over one of these things as well. Any answers there for the animal that this is referencing for that product?
We've got a few animals, but the most common was the armadillo, and that is correct.
It is the armadillo. That is correct. That's what our little armadillo friend looks like, for those that have forgotten.
Sandra was first on that.
Excellent. Here's another example. This one is the black and white version. This one's called the zebra. And as you can see from this angle, they are really quite shallow, they're not very tall. And given that this is black and white on a black and white kind of background, it's not very well contrasted as well. So really common for motorists just to drive straight over them. So I don't really think that they offer the same separation as some of the other ones, but something that you can think about.
A couple of other quick comments in there. One was around the narrower the separation, the closer vehicles may go to a cyclist, and certainly if it's just a painted line, they go quite close. It's not there, so I think that's a fair comment. One other one that sort of came in was talking about, well, Austra's indicating that you don't need to do separation for vehicle speed under the sort of 50 km/h mark. I'd be a little bit sort of hesitant on that because I think that separation provides some pretty great benefit for getting more people riding and still creating that safer environment. So, take that as what Austra's is, which is general guidance, and don't be using that as an absolute mandated trigger. Well, I don't need any separation if it's under 50 km/h speed limit.
Yeah, that's good advice. We do also have another figure later on in this presentation that might provide some different guidance there. So no spoilers, but I'll be showing that shortly. Different type of separator for this one. So this one has got those kind of vertical paddles. I do like these ones. These are quite common as well. Another example of that paddle being used here in Melbourne. And this final one is just like individual, kind of like bollards, I suppose you could say, with this narrow separation here as well. This one's quite an unusual example because it is parking lane at certain times of the day, and then it becomes a clearway and opened up to the general traffic. So as mentioned, if you are adjacent to the parking lane, you do want to be providing a greater separation so that you don't have that risk of passenger doors opening and accessing the bicycle lane. So this one's not a sensational example, and they're struck very often also, I should say. But just thought I'd include this one just for completeness. All right, on-road bicycle lanes. I've got a question here, which is, what is wrong with this photo? So you can see a very confused cyclist there. And I want you to tell me what you think is wrong with this photo. I might just get rid of that cyclist. There we go, so we can see a little bit clearer. But what do you think is wrong with this photo? Chuck your answers in the chat, please.
Lots of answers coming in. A lot of people mentioning dooring, no separation, cars partly in the cycle way, lots of risk of dooring, pens in the bike lane, pedestrians walking the cycle way, no gap between park cars.
So this is
sorry, okay.
Certainly more symbolic of our general bicycle network. This is basically how things look for a lot of our networks, which is just an on-road bicycle lane adjacent the dooring zone. So that was the answer I was after there, which I would consider the most significant risk in this photo. And very good spotting for the person that noted that there was pedestrians, actually a skateboarder using the bicycle lane, and the mum there was on her scooter. But yeah, certainly the risk I was wanted to talk about there is that dooring. And you may have actually noticed that this cyclist that we've taken a photo of there has positioned themselves not within the middle of the bicycle lane, but further away, closer to live traffic. Right? They're actually choosing to ride closer to live traffic to get away from the door. That is how significant that risk is, both as a perceived risk, as in that's how the individual feels, that that's where the most scary part is. I want to get away from that. But also, generally, that's what our statistics will tell us as well, that getting hit by that door is quite a significant trauma event and can also lead on to additional accidents occurring or incidents occurring, being you could fall onto the carriageway and then, have another crash outcome there. So very, very serious dooring incidents. And unfortunately, it's a super common tale that cyclists, they may have their own anecdotes within this space, including I'm looking at one there. But I'll continue. So
we're going to give Paul a prize and Sean a prize. They were very early on and they weren't quite the first, but I'm giving them prizes anyway. Any recommendations on spacing of bollards to try to limit cars entering into a cycleway, like those flexible bollards you had from Albert Street? Do you know of any specifics around that?
Yeah, I would suggest, so if you've got like a car parking bay, which from memory is about 6 meters long, you'd want to be putting one kind of at the front and the back of that car parking bay. So you want to make sure that the doors can open so they're not always hitting that bollard, but if you put them less frequently, then they could just be parking closer to the adjacent bicycle lane. Hopefully that sketch makes sense. So basically the front and the rear of each parking bay, I think, would be a good measure. So every 6 meters. Okay. The dooring risk. So a door can swing approximately 1.2 meters wide. It's a little bit strange that the bicycle lanes adjacent those parked cars are also about 1.2 meters wide. So potentially the entire width of that facility could be taken up by a bicycle door, so by a vehicle door, meaning the cyclist has to move around that, potentially enter a live traffic lane or collide with the door itself. I've got this very short video that I might just play a few times of my colleague, Ken, who is riding and somebody opens the door just in front of Ken. Ken is lucky enough to have amazing ninja-like reflexes and very comfortably got around that door. But if he was not paying attention or, focused on other things, that could have been a very different outcome. This was using that 360-degree camera that I've got mounted on my helmet there, and it's just looking backwards for those wondering how on earth I recorded this. It's actually recording a full sphere and I just focused on Ken. But yeah, just a real example of, a near miss there, and why protected bicycle lanes are a much more attractive facility. Ken, any thoughts on that one?
No, as I suspect many of the people on this, if you're a regular cyclist, you're getting that a couple of times a month anyway, so you're pretty nimble on your feet. I noticed somebody also put in there, you're kind of usually looking at the cars to try to see if you can spot somebody sitting in there and be ready. But you're right, I mean, it really doesn't align that well with our safe system principles of always having to be on, absolutely paying for this. And we will see the mistakes of people opening doors in front of people. We can continue to try and get people to be aware, but physically building it out and designing it out is obviously going to be a better thing for everybody.
Another good example there of an experienced cyclist that you can see Ken. Oh, hang on. I lost my pen. You can see Ken once again not riding in the middle of a bicycle path. So if you've ever had that conversation with community members, why aren't cyclists, staying in the middle of their lane or staying over there? It's actually really common for experienced cyclists to position themselves away from the dooring zone. And potentially if Ken wasn't, situated there, he was riding in the middle, that could have been a different outcome as well. So, yeah. We've got this slide here that just demonstrates where cyclists' trauma is occurring for dooring collisions. Unsurprisingly, 75% occur on the driver's side. I say unsurprisingly for two reasons. One being most of our bicycle lanes are adjacent the parking driver's side. So that's where physically cyclists are most likely to be. And also, if there's vehicle driving, there's likely a driver. So it's not unreasonable to have expected to have seen such a high figure situated on the right-hand side of the vehicle. Some of you may be wondering, where do you reckon this passenger side risk comes from? And I would suggest a lot of that would be if you've ever ridden in CBDs or anything like that, busy districts, and you may be lane filtering or something like that approaching an intersection. So it could be a stopped vehicle at the lights and you're coming up this side, ready to get to the bike box or situate yourself right at the front of the intersection. That's when passengers may choose just to hop out of their car to get to their destination. If they're in a taxi or an Uber or something like that, or the parents are dropping off their kids or something like that. That's a real common way for that passenger side collision to occur. I've actually been involved in that type of collision, which was very low speed, so no real damage, just damage to the vehicle. Yeah, not a comfortable experience regardless. I might just go through this one quickly, Ken, and then I will pause and let everyone have a little stretch and things like that, just because I appreciate I've been talking for a while and you might want to just have a quick break. So this is a treatment matrix that was developed a few years ago now by VicRoads, the Department of Transport, as they're called now. And it suggests what type of treatments may be appropriate in given scenarios. So along the top columns here, we've got different types of treatments. And along the rows, we've got, what is the strategic function of that network? So for instance, if it is a traffic route, anything from relocating car parking, relocating cyclists, protected lanes, off-road parts, that could be appropriate. It's worth investigating. Things that may be appropriate are shown in that yellow color there, where it's, collector roads or local roads, and the red obviously being not appropriate at all. Would be the relocation of cyclists if you've nominated that this is a bicycle priority route. So I wouldn't say that this is the most definitive guidance matrix thing out there, but it could be something that you could use as you are developing any of your projects, what you could be potentially investigating. This could provide some evidence to back up that decision making. But as I said, I do want to pause and give everyone a chance to have a stretch, get a cup of tea or a coffee. My clock says 10:56, so perhaps 11 o'clock on the dot, we can rejoin.
Thanks, Max. Let's get back into it in 4 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you managed to get a stretch, had a drink. Have I missed any questions in the chats there, Ken?
No, I think everything's generally been covered. A little bit of conversation going on there. Some questions on where some of that data came from, which was from, you've got it at the source at the bottom of the VicRoads one. I think it was originally from a Cameron Munro bit of research, if I remember correctly, in that document. But you can find it in that VicRoads document I put a link into. Just some general admin stuff. You can change the view of what you're seeing with Mac from the slides and make bigger by going to the view up the top right in your Zoom and changing things around if you like. But back to you, Max. Let's get going.
Fantastic. Okay, you've got another example of an on-road bicycle lane. This one was actually conducted as a trial. The difference between this one is maybe a bit difficult to see, but there's a little green strip, right? And this was deliberately painted like that, kind of off center, so cyclists ride further away from the dooring zone. So exactly as our experienced cyclists that we were talking about before were already positioning themselves, but this was like a cue for cyclists to actually take that position. Interestingly, though, that is actually positioning themselves closer to the tram there and the light rail, I'm sure the term you used there, which is very, very interesting because you also want to be ensuring that you've got a good buffer away from those heavy vehicles. But anyway, the analysis of this trial did suggest qualitatively that 75% of cyclists actually felt more comfortable after the installation of this green stripe, which is quite remarkable. It's not doing all that much, but for whatever reason, they felt that it was. I wouldn't suggest that this is, what we should be aiming for across our network. We need to still be doing protected bicycle lanes and things like that, but just thought I'd share this little trial that was completed. It's still installed out there now today, so it obviously was deemed effective. And in terms of actual data that was collected for this particular trial, there was a lateral tracking of cyclists, shifting away from the center that would range between 160 mil to 300 mil. So there was actually a change in behavior from before the trial was implemented to afterwards. Cyclists were actually riding closer to the live traffic lane. There you go. Another example of this trial is actually completed in Hastings in New Zealand. This one I don't have the data on, as I understand it's still being implemented, but it's not actually designed to work as is shown in this photo where cyclists are meant to ride on this little green dot. It's basically just a constant reminder for any motorists that that's a bicycle lane. So, another way to do that would just be doing bicycle symbols every kind of 20, 50 meters or whatever. But they wanted to try what this dotted green line would do and how that could potentially change behaviors. So I'll let you know of any feedback that is achieved from that trial, but I wouldn't expect that to be a significant safety benefit. Now, if we are talking about on-road bicycle lanes, what we could be doing is providing that buffer in between both the parked lane and also on-road live traffic, referred to as a double chevron. So those kind of line marking, pavement marking, that's referred to as a chevron. If you've got it on both sides of the bicycle lane, then it's referred to as a double chevron. Just for some, context around what kind of reasonable figures you could be expecting to see for those type of facilities. So you'd be aiming for chevron separator widths between 600 mil and 1.2 meters. And yeah, it's just a way to provide additional buffer between obviously your parking lane and the live traffic lane. That's obviously with the assumption or the ability that you do have that carriageway cross section available. If you only had space to provide buffer on one side or the other, you may have something that looks like this, where you've only got the chevron situated adjacent the parking lane. The theory about when to apply this particular treatment is if you have parking that has a time limit or there's a high turnover there, meaning that parked car doors open up quite frequently, that's when the buffer on that side of the bicycle lane may be seen as more imperative. Just some more figures for you. Whereas if there isn't that time restriction and it's more longer style parking, you may instead put the buffer on the side of the live traffic stream. Okay, so assuming that you don't have space to do both, if there's lots of turnover on parking, perhaps put the buffer on that side. If there isn't, and it's a lower speed, this is 30 kilometers per hour, perhaps put the buffer on the traffic side of things. Obviously, in a perfect world, we wouldn't be worried about doing buffers and things like that. We'd just have protected facilities, but something to think of personally, and I think a lot of cyclists would feel this as well, is you're generally more concerned about a parked vehicle opening up their door than an errant vehicle coming up from behind you, because, you know, if the sight lines are good and you're, you know, got your bike lights on, you're visible and everything like that, you feel a bit more confident that the vehicle behind you will see you, whereas we know that not every parked vehicle driver actually checks the cyclists within the bicycle lane before just swinging out their door. So, you know, subjectively, my analysis would be I prefer to have a buffer on the parked vehicle side. All right, exclusive bicycle lanes. These things, all the rage on our arterial networks. They're pretty common, and even, you know, in future developments, we're still seeing these bicycle lanes being implemented. Even at speeds 60, 70 kilometers, 80 kilometers per hour, really high speeds, where if a cyclist were to be struck by a vehicle, the likelihood of death is pretty high. So it's really not a, you know, a selling point, and not something that we should be advocating for. In saying that, you know, as I mentioned in the previous module, we do have different demographics of cyclists, and some cyclists will choose, you know, regardless of what there is off-road, they just want to be able to cycle quickly, most directly, and they want to use something like this. So I do like the idea of providing both kind of facilities. You've got something on road for those that are really into the Leica and into it, like Ken there, and you've got an off-road facility for someone like me that likes to dawdle along with my shopping bags. I think that's a good outcome. But another thing to consider is if you've got the ability to provide exclusive bike lanes, so you've got it within your carriageway cross-section, to be able to demarcate that across the mid-block as exclusively for cyclists, is there a potential to provide some degree of separation there? You know, and that doesn't need to be, as I said before, a full Copenhagen treatment, but some degree of, you know, paddles or something like that, just to give cyclists, you know, a little bit more safety and separation from errant vehicles. This type of treatment you may have seen dotted around. Apologies for the pun there. Sometimes it's referred to as kind of a breadcrumb treatment for bicycle lanes, where it's basically no bicycle lane whatsoever, and then you've got a little ... with a bicycle symbol, and then 200 meters later, you've got that same little thing. I really don't think that this offers any type of benefit. This is called a wide curbside bike lane. It can be pretty confusing for a cyclist. This is an example where it's actually in an 80 kilometer per hour speed zone. Going uphill as well, it's very, very, very uncomfortable to cycle here unless you're super, super fit. But a really poor example of a bicycle lane design, in my opinion. And this is a real example of one where I think we should be looking to build off-road and get cyclists away from that carriageway, because it's not a comfortable environment to be riding in. I mentioned this in the previous module as well, this Global Street Design Guide. And as mentioned, we've got a link to it on the LMS. We don't actually provide the entire guide on the LMS. Really useful reference. It basically goes through a whole suite of treatments that you could be looking at as part of your cycling projects. It's got these handy little you know, implications associated with particular types of treatments. And, they might use slightly different terminologies to what we would use in Australia, but still it's a wonderful resource, even if you just want to use them for, graphic sharing with the community and things like that. What does a bidirectional facility mean? Well, you can just take a little snip of that and go from there. So anyway, really strongly recommend getting stuck into that one. Download that and have a flick through. Massive document though, so there's a lot of content in there. Mixing traffic. Ken.
No, I was just going to acknowledge that we do have lots of sort of questions and comments down different tracks sort of popping in, which is good. There's a bit of discussion going on in there. One particular one that was a question, I suppose, was around the use of 30km/h speed limits in high bicycle areas. Local streets promote more ability for safe sharing. Your thoughts on that, Max?
I think that's pretty reasonable. It's actually coming up in a few slides' time. But yeah, when we do have those lower speeds, 30km/h, it's probably not unreasonable to expect cyclists to claim the traffic lane and to ride, directly situated in there. The example that I showed before, though, was kind of, I think it was 2 or 3 traffic lanes all in one direction. And although it was 30km/h, I still think that's a pretty strange environment to tell cyclists to share the traffic lane if there's multiple lanes to kind of position yourself in. So I'm actually not against doing a separate bicycle lane in those type of environments, although it was low speed. But yeah, general rule of thumb, I think 30s, it's generally accepted as being okay for sharing the road.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And Marissa's kindly popped in a link to that design guide into the Q&A there, but we've also got it in the learning management system, which I think we'll show you at the end just to remind you where it is.
No dramas. So this image here is actually not designed as a mixed traffic environment. It's very difficult to see, but right at the back there, you can see it's got that little dotted breadcrumb bicycle treatment. And you can see this cyclist here is riding very close to the dooring zone, but I think this is a perfect example of where we could be looking at creating mixed traffic, so letting cyclists ride right in the middle here. And if they're riding slowly or anything like that, then they just have to hold up traffic behind them. I think this is a local street. It is used as a rat run. It's used as a means to get to other arterial roads. But it's a real opportunity to, if this is identified as an important strategic cycling corridor, which it is, we should be bringing down speeds and making cyclists feel comfortable as opposed to squeezing them in right to the edge of the parking lane there. It's a bit of a weird street, this one. This was the figure that I mentioned earlier in today's module, where it suggests what type of treatments may be appropriate for different speed environments. Less than 40km/h is lane sharing or mixed traffic. Between the 40 to 60, relocation of parking, separated bicycle lanes, so our protected bicycle lanes within those features. Anything greater than 60, off-road bicycle paths. As Ken mentioned before, as with any guidance documents, you've obviously got to use your own professional judgment, and you need to understand what will work within the space and road context that you are developing your project. But I think this is a really good building block to start those conversations. So the source for that one is down the bottom there. Okay, mixing traffic is generally done through the use of these, which are called sharrows, which stands for shared arrows. That's the symbol for it there. The definition of it is this symbol represents a point in time where cyclists no longer have to ride to the left-hand side of a carriageway. They can claim the whole lane. Okay, so they're not forced to ride over there. They can go right in the middle of a traffic lane and they are entitled to ride there. That is what it's meant to communicate. Unfortunately, not everyone understands that. These were actually recently implemented near my family home, and my mum had to ask me what this symbol was because she hadn't seen it because it was installed near residential street. And yeah, it was pretty cool, and I got to explain a bit of engineering to mum. But she appreciated it. She understands. Okay, so this is where cyclists are allowed to ride in the middle of the road and share the traffic lane, and we're just going to be treated as one user. That's great. Generally, as mentioned, we want to keep these in low speed, low traffic volume environments. Local streets is what you're thinking of here. This one is in a 30 km/h environment. And this other example here, this is in a regional Victorian town in Warrnambool. And they're doing wonderful things out there in Warrnambool. So for those who are, not in a metro CBD environment and are working in rural locations or regional locations, rest assured these treatments can still be installed in those locations. This isn't just about those who are city dwellers or people that live in inner city suburbs. It's applicable for those in townships and things like that. So they've got a 30 km/h network within their CBD, within their township. And they also have the use of these sharrows, so cyclists can just claim the traffic lane. And it works really well, I would say, having personally ridden through there. And, I actually delivered training out there. We had a cohort of cyclists, so about a dozen of us, all riding along these local streets there, and we just got to ride right in the middle of the traffic lane. For those that have never actually seen these things or experienced it, it can be a bit daunting. You may be a bit unfamiliar as to how you're meant to behave, but I do think that they offer a degree of improved safety. And I'm wondering if we've got any questions about that sharrows yet, Ken, because I do know that only a few months ago there was a research report that came out that actually said that they are worse for safety than improved. So I'm not sure if that comment has come through yet, but I might just address that even before it comes in. So that was, I think it was done in Boston, this study, an evaluation of the use of sharrows in local streets there, and suggested that it gave cyclists a false sense of confidence, and motorists they didn't know what those things were, so they weren't kind of effective as it was first considered, and there's a little bit of skepticism around them. My kind of opinion is, that's one research document that suggests that. There's lots and lots of different guidance documents that still recommends implementing these things based on other research documents. I'd say it's a watch this space. Do I think that the sharrows provide the same level of safety as protected bicycle lanes? No, I do not think that they do. But in local streets, low volumes, low speeds, I still think that they have their merit. But who knows, maybe in 6 months we could be referring to different guidelines and that could be updated. So, yeah.
It's certainly hit a few nerves, a few different people. Yeah, so the link to that article was put in there fairly early on, some different commentaries. Yeah, which jurisdictions use sharrows and don't, and why, and some experiences. So good to see that all in the chat. I mean, I agree with your comments. I think that context is important. Understanding that it's not a physical separation treatment, and you'd want speeds to be very low, and so it's all good point.
I just thought I'd share this one, Ken. This is a sharrow flower in Portland, Oregon. I was there 3 weeks ago doing some cycling, but this one is just showing that the sharrow is kind of going in each direction. So if you're a cyclist, you can claim the road in any direction. They're massive on those sharrows in Portland, Ken. I'll tell you that. It's probably their go-to. Really, really common.
Well, linked in with another comment that came in that local, or their experiences of what some local governments were using sharrows as an excuse not to do more substantial stuff and claiming they've done their cycling treatment. So we don't like to see that sort of use of with them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I'll get some examples of where the sharrows can be supplemented by local area traffic management treatments, just to ensure that you don't have that through traffic. You don't have lots of traffic volumes. It's not being used as a rat run, and you're also managing operating speed. So it does need to be used in conjunction with local area traffic management treatments. Okay.
Yep.
Got this other snap of where not to use a sharrow. This one is in the middle of a tram track. And for those that have ever ridden adjacent light rail, you will know that if you are riding parallel, it's very, very dangerous. It's an opportunity for your tire to get stuck in that little gap. Instead, it's recommended to cross over at 60 to 90 degrees, just to mitigate that risk. So actually putting the sharrow there kind of sends the wrong message to cyclists. You don't actually want them riding on top of that situation there, because then they have to cross over that track. So that is an example of what not to do. And I can confirm that that did not last. That lasted about 3 weeks, and then it got scrubbed off. So that's no longer out there. But something to be mindful of for those that work adjacent light rail.
And you've done some studies into bikes and crossing rail lines, haven't you, Max?
I did, Ken, and I actually wrote an abstract for the Australian College of Road Safety and CAMS in a couple of weeks, which may be presented. We will have to sit and wait. But yes, done some work within that space around cyclists crossing light rail and also general rail tracks. It's not just Australia that has that issue. It's certainly a global issue. Some jurisdictions are actually managing to find a gap filler, something that you can actually put in that gap, so that cyclists can ride straight over the track. They don't need to worry about it. It's proving to be quite an expensive exercise, and it's not as easy as just sliding a little bit of material. It's actually retrofitting the entire track system. But anyway, I'm not going into too much detail about that. Interesting topic. If you are interested, feel free to send me a message about that one. I did allude before about local area traffic management treatments. So those are all things, bring down vehicle speeds, make sure that vehicles don't feel like, they're entitled to travel at high speeds in these spaces, or it's not being used as a rat run where they can just get from A to B the quickest way. That's what the arterial network is for. A really common way to manage that, that are also part of your cycle network, so to create these little one-way slow points type of things. I really like these on the cycling network because, as you can see, there's a little gap there on the side. So cyclists, they can cycle straight through. They're unimpeded by that vertical deflection, whereas general traffic, they do have to slow down. Really good idea there. Similar example there. This one is in Christchurch, actually, but just that same philosophy of we letting cyclists have that continuous path through there and general traffic having to slow down. You want to ensure that you're providing those at regular intervals. So it's not just a concentrated effort at one section or segment of your network that has lower speeds, but along that cycling corridor, you want to be ensuring that there are a constant reinforcement of lower speeds. And actually what's really common when I was cycling in Portland was basically providing, because those all kind of American cities are based on that block structure. It's all just nice, neat blocks, and everything's done perpendicular at every intersection and things like that. What's really common is that they might have, an arterial road, and then adjacent that, the next parallel route, that would be the bicycle network corridor, which is just a local street. And every, I would say, half a dozen streets, they would just block it off to general traffic. So you can't just travel that local parallel route and use that as your means of travel. It can't be used as an alternative route because you're actually forced to get back onto the arterial road, which is what it's meant to do. and cyclists can just cycle straight on through those little blocks. So they're only, they're wide enough to block vehicle entry, but you can cycle through if you are on a saddle, which I think is a really good idea. And I've got some examples of that actually in Melbourne, which I thought I would show as well.
Well, it kind of links with a comment
Sorry?
that it sort of links a bit with a comment that came through around whether there should be cycling banned from some major traffic arterials. And, yeah, that's an interesting sort of question to discuss for long periods of time over a coffee or something like that, as to how we structure the hierarchy of our road and those sort of things. But I think the principle you've outlined there is to have a route that has these wonderful cycle facilities and is just, discouraged from cars, because there is the parallel route that is, is the major traffic route. I think that's the space where we're more in at the moment.
Absolutely. And it just comes back to what you're nominating as the strategic function of these routes. And if it's for cars, then very good, make it for cars. But if it's for bicycles, then make it for bicycles, because we too often get caught up in trying to, support every single mode in these environments, which rarely benefits any mode. So instead, where you've got these cycling corridors, let's really try and invest in our treatments there. That was a great quote, Ken. I wish I'd have written that down. That was good. But this is an example of that actual throughput separation here in Melbourne. It's not actually in a shallow environment. It is an on-road bicycle lane. It's a little bit confusing from this perspective, from this photo. So I will instead go to an aerial image of what this looks like. So that photo was taken about there, looking down there. So you can see that there is an actual physical obstruction there. So motorists cannot travel through, or their route is impeded. Now, the disbenefit associated with this particular treatment is if a motorist did want to travel through, their journey might look something like that, which they could do, okay? The issue with this type of arrangement is our bicycle journey looks just like a straight line going straight through there, so theirs is pretty easy. But due to this arrangement, we've actually introduced 2 conflict points. So they've had to cross over the bicycle lane twice in order just to continue through. So it's not a perfect example, because ideally what we would be trying to do is get motorists all the way off this environment and then get to an arterial, and then they can get to another road that would provide access to this block. But that hasn't quite been achieved here. In saying that, it's probably not that common a movement, just based on experience, just riding through this quite often, because motorists don't tend to like to have to do this bit of a U-turn bendy thing and cross over the bicycle lanes. It's just a bit of a strange thing to be doing. But another way that this could have been managed, which is used further down this same bicycle lane, is doing this full closure of the road. So the other one was more like a partial closure. This one is more of a full. Once again, a bit difficult to see from this angle, so I'll go up to an aerial, whereby if motorists, wanted to drive through, unfortunately they cannot. So their route forces them to do a U-turn, turn around, go back onto an arterial to be able to get to the other side there. Whereas cyclists have that opportunity to ride straight through, and their connectivity is managed and maintained. Really, really good way to manage your local networks is providing those closures. Get rid of that through traffic, don't have those high traffic volumes, and also slowing your vehicles down in those spaces. Ken, any questions?
A few comments in there about these treatments. Somebody knows the area. They think there's actually a bollard stopping that bike, that car doing that little turn these days.
There you go.
But yeah, some discussion around potential impacts on local businesses and those sort of things. But let's keep ticking along, Max, and we'll have time to jump into the learning management system.
Well, that's exactly what the time is now. So I've actually managed to get through the content in a good amount of time, which gives us plenty of opportunity to ask questions, or what I'll get stuck into right now is our assignment. Okay, so keep the questions coming through, but what I wanted to talk about is, I'll just go to the next slide so we can close for the day. Yeah, just make sure that whenever you are providing on-road facilities, that you do give cyclists the opportunity to exit that facility. That's not a great outcome. Also, something that's really, really common is temporary traffic management, blocking bicycle lanes. Super, super common. If you are doing any works, doesn't have to be a cycling project whatsoever, but any civil works, there's bicycle facilities there that are existing, or there's a cycling cohort that rides through there. How is that going to be managed as part of your temporary detours and things like that? Really, really important to have that thinking done up front, because it's super common just to see this bike lane closed and then good luck with the rest of it. All right. As I said, I want to talk about the assignment because it is the next part of the coursework for this module. On the LMS, hopefully everyone's seen this and it's not unfamiliar to you, but under Module 2, you'll see there's another 360-degree video that will get you to click on and watch. So please do watch that prior to next session. It's got a similar theme as, or sorry, similar structure as to our previous one. We'll show you some examples of riding on road in different facilities. You get to see what it's like in a protected lane, and then also what it's like just riding in a painted facility adjacent to the dooring zone. So if you've actually never cycled, really good example to be able to experience what it feels like as a cyclist on the saddle. So please do watch that before our next module. The Module 2 presentation, all the slides I went through then, is just saved there. Module 2 assignment. So this is what we'll get you to work on at the end of today's session. You'll see there's two documents there. One is a Word document, one is a PDF. And I already have these documents open, so I'm just going to share the Word document first and just go through the process of this assignment so everyone feels comfortable with what they are required to do. So the first thing you'll need to be doing, step 1, is download and review the Module 2 Design Review file. That's the PDF that's saved there as well. I'll just open up that PDF as well. PDF is 4 pages. It is a project in Launceston along York Street. We did just make this little note in the top left-hand side there that this design is purely for training purposes. Please don't write to your local MP or get in touch with council about this or anything like that. It's just for this course. So keep that in mind. And what's actually happening in Launceston, what's being proposed is, you can see is some raised intersections, which are these hatched little bits there. There's also a bicycle lane in the green there. The legend is shown just at the bottom of each page. If you have any issues interpreting drawings, if that's not part of your skill set or anything like that, that's fine. Just give me a buzz. I'll go through what this is all talking about. But have a flick through these sheets. There's only 4 pages as mentioned. Have a think about what's being done. And we'll hop back to our Word document here. So step 2, review the existing conditions of the site using Google Street View. So if you just click on that link there, it'll launch you into York Street, Launceston. You can drop the little man there and just have a quick squiz around just to see what the existing environment looks like, because what that design is, it's proposing changes to that existing environment. So you need to know both the existing state and the design. Step 3 is filling out the table provided below, where we've got some questions that we want you to answer. The final step is saving and uploading this document onto the LMS. So you can save it as a Word document. You can PDF it. PDF is probably preferred, but Word is also fine if that's all good for you. All we need is your name there. Once you upload it to LMS, we get a little notification. We get an email to say, Ken Beer has just submitted their assignment and it's ready for marking. So that's how we get that status update. To actually upload it to the LMS, you go back to this screen here where you downloaded everything, and you scroll down to the bottom and there'll be a button there that says upload assignment. My screen looks different because I get to grade everyone's, but that's where you'll be able to upload it. The questions that we want you to answer are only these 3. So the first question is, how does the existing environment cater for cyclists? We strongly encourage you look at the previous modules presentations to get the terminology and the jargon correct. That's really what we're evaluating here. We want to make sure that you're using the right phrases, so it's technically accurate what you are saying. We do not need paragraphs or, full volumes of text, a full background of how Launceston was founded and how it's been developed over the many years and where James Bogue is situated in relation to York Street. We don't need that information, as interesting as that may be. We just want you to focus on the technical aspects of the engineering, okay? So dot points is completely fine. Question number 2, how does the design cater for cyclists? So the first one was, what's the existing conditions? Second question, what's the design proposing? Once again, dot points, perfect. Final question, what treatments/changes, you may also use the term interventions, all fine. What things would you tweak within the design to improve the safety for cyclists? Once again, we will be evaluating your grade based on your technical understanding. So please refer back to previous modules, the presentations and things like that. So you're actually using the terms that have been used. If you're using that, you're a very strong chance of getting the perfect score. If there are any issues with, I suppose, we're not quite seeing what we were expected to see, or what is being proposed is maybe have a negligible difference on the safety of cyclists, we will provide that feedback through the LMS. So you will receive your grade through the LMS. You'll get to see what score you got with any of our notes attached to that. And I also just highlighted this one here. We only want you to note 3. We've had people note dozens, but we only read the first 3 because we just want you to focus what you think is the most important imperative changes to improve cycling safety. All right. Hopefully that was clear. Do you think I missed anything there, Ken?
I think you've done well, Max. So just as long as people have access to the learning management system and they go in and they download that PDF and are able to view it and jump in there on Street View and have a look, I think the Word document there is quite self-explanatory. And there will be an upload option for people there, so hopefully they'll be able to do that. Actually, if you go up near your little picture of your face there, you can change to a student and so see what they see. Yep, switch roll down the bottom, go to student, and
oh, there you go. I'm learning. And
if you scroll down now, there you go. You get that add submission button, click on that, and then if you click on that, Max, you can click on the add submission. It'll come up with, yep, there you go. You can drag and drop, or you can, hit upload and off you go.
Perfect. And the due date that we have said for this is next Monday. So we have allocated you some time to get stuck into this now. It should only take you 10 to 20 minutes. If it's taking longer than that, then please just get in touch and we'll be happy to have a chat through it. But gave you some time to be able to watch the video after today's session and complete this assignment. So hopefully everyone's able to get stuck into that now. Any final questions before we break for the day?
So just to recap there, we're doing that assignment. So we're giving you some time to do the assignment and also catch up on your quiz if you didn't quite get to that for last session. And you've got that little bit of 360-degree footage to view in preparation for next session.
We've just had a question come in the assignment. Are the intersections still signalised or just raised?
They are still signalised, correct.
Question. Well, excellent. I think we've done really well there. We've covered a lot, and I think most of the sort of comments and questions were generally covered off. So thanks to everybody for putting that in and having those discussions. And we look forward to seeing you a few minutes early for next session for a bit of Max's trivia, which some of you got to early and won some prizes before we even started. But log in early before next session for a chance to win a prize.
Sensational. Thanks everyone for your contributions. Look forward to seeing you next week. Have a lovely weekend.
Thanks.
Yeah, bye.
Yeah, well.